Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight we'll be covering the Analects, chapter 5, verses 19 through 25. Penny, would you mind reading verse 19?
All right. Verse 19. Chu Shang asked, saying, "The ministers who won thrice took office and manifested no joy in his countenance. Thrice he retired from office and manifested no displeasure. He made it a point to inform the new minister of the way in which he had conducted the government. What do you say of him?" The master replied, "He was loyal." "Was he perfectly virtuous?" "I do not know. How can he be pronounced perfectly virtuous?" Su Chang proceeded, "When the officer Chu killed the prince of Qi, Chan Wan, though he was the owner of 40 horses, abandoned them and left the country. Coming to another state, he said, 'They're here like our great officer Chu,' and left it. He came to a second state and with the same observation left it also. What do you say of him?" The master replied, "He was pure." "Was he perfectly virtuous?" "I do not know. How can he be pronounced perfectly virtuous?"
Thank you very much, Penny. Does anybody else wish to read their version of the Analects?
Joe, I think I have a different translation by Burton Watson.
Oh, very much. Please, very much appreciate
It looked, I think it was different than what Penny was reading.
Thank you.
Zhishang asked, saying, "Ji Wen, the prime minister of Chu, served 3 times as prime minister, but showed no sign of delight, and 3 times was dismissed from the post, but showed no sign of resentment. As former prime minister, he invariably reported to the new prime minister on affairs of state. What do you think of this?" The master said, "He acted with loyalty. Was he humane? I don't know how he could be called humane. Kuzi assassinated the ruler of Kui. Chen Huanzi, who for his carriages owned 10 4-horse teams, abandoned them and left the state. When he arrived in another state, he said, 'The people here are no better than our high official, Kuzi,' and he left that state. Arriving in another state, he said, 'More like our high official, Chuzi,' and he left that state too. What would you say of him?" The master said, "A man of integrity. Was he humane? I don't know how he could be called humane."
Thank you, Dave. Very
Sure,
much
Joe.
appreciate that. Jason, would you like to go ahead and share your
Yeah, okay.
translation?
Yeah, this one is the 2 translation. Basically, one talk about the perfect virtue, another one talk about human, but basically just that you know, Confucius here is talking about Ren, the benevolence. Okay, he has been talking about for forever. Okay, so here's that's the Ren. Okay, he's talking about. So Ren is a very high virtue. So technically, you say it's a perfect virtue. Okay, technically it's correct. It's very difficult to reach. And Confucius mentioned about Ren, or you want to call it a human, which is also correct. Okay, but in my translation, I want to preserve the original meaning, original word, Ren, which has been used for over, I just would make a word count 111 times in Confucius Analects. So here's the translation. Okay, Zizang is asking some historical account. Okay, 2 accounts. One is happened in the state of Chu, which are the south, and another one that event happened about, I think it's about 100 years ago. Okay, before Confucius' time, and then the thing the guy, Mr. Choi, killed the lord, his lord. It's happened on the state of Qi, which is Confucius' neighboring state. And that one, I think that happened when Confucius was young. Okay, so basically it's kind of like, 50, 100 years ago's event, and people are talking about this kind of thing. So Zizang is Confucius' very young disciple. So he asked the chief minister, which is the prime minister in the state of Chu, the chief minister, Ziwen, was appointed to the position of chief minister 3 times, but he never showed joy in his countenance. He was dismissed 3 times, but he never showed indignation in his countenance and informed the new chief minister on the affairs of the old government. What do you think of him? The master, Confucius, say he was loyal. Here, loyal has 2 meanings. One is loyal to your lord, but I think here Confucius is talking about another meaning, means devoted, dutiful, full heart to work on your duty. So Confucius said he was loyal, and Zizang asked again, was he Ren? Okay, so that's the high virtue he's asking. Confucius said, I don't know. How can he be Ren? So he means I don't know other things. Okay, so based on this, he cannot be qualified as Ren. Okay, then continue. Zizang asked another event, which probably happened 50 years before this time. Mr. Choi killed the Duke of Qi. That's a famous story because Duke Zhuang, okay, was killed by his minister. And the minister set up his young son as a new duke. Okay, so that's a story happened probably 50 years ago. So that's what he said. Mr. Choi killed the Duke Zhuang of Qi. Chen Wenzi is a so-called the 5th, okay, under Duke of Qi. Okay, so he said Chen Wenzi abandoned his 5th of 10th of chariot and left the state of Qi. Here, most of the translation call it abandoned his horses, 10 horses or 40 horses. I think that's not correct because when you talk about you abandon 10 or 40 horses, probably doesn't mean a lot. I think here they talk about, the Chinese talk about 10乘, that means 10 chariot. Okay, so here is just like in the previous section, we talk about Zilu can manage a state or a house of 1,000 horses or 1,000 chariot. Okay, so basically he's talking about the size of a state or a city he is managing or he fills on that city. So here he said that Chen Wenzi abandoned his filth, okay, and his 5th is not that big. It's about 10 chariot. Okay, so that means it's not a big city, a small, but basically it's his 5th. Okay, so he abandoned his 5th of 10th of chariot and left the state of Qi. Arriving in the state, he said, the minister is like Mr. Qi in my home country, and he left. Then he arriving in another state, and he said again, like Mr. Choi in my home country, and left. So Zizang asked, what do you think of him? Confucius said he was unmixed. The Chinese word called qing, that's why most of the translation will use pure. That means he is clean. He doesn't want to mix with dirty people. So I think so I decided to use the word unmixed, which also means pure, right? So Zizang asks again, was he Ren? And Confucius had the same answer. I don't know. How can he be Ren? Okay, so here again, Confucius set a high standard for being Ren. Okay, so that's the story of these two stories. Okay, one is a loyal or dutiful prime minister. Another one is a power-thirsty prime minister who killed the Duke of Qi and set up a new lord. But one of his fifth, okay, he decided to abandon his country because he doesn't want to work with the prime minister who is kill his old lord. So that's the two stories. Thank you.
Okay. This is normally where I would ask Aman for comments, but I know you just joined us, Aman.
Good evening, all.
Good evening and congratulations.
Thank
again
you.
on your new arrival.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
I do it on purpose so you can have day off.
Would you like to comment, Aman, or would you?
I'm going to need to get caught up to speed. I will go ahead and just tell
Wow.
everyone, hi, it's nice to see you.
Wow. Okay.
This is me dressed and, functional. Yeah, I just got off grandfather shift. So I raced home, logged in, and I just came in at the back end. So I'll let us go ahead and proceed with this chapter and have more to say, I'm sure, in the future.
Sure. Okay. Go ahead.
Can I just say something real quick, Joe?
Please, please.
It's quite a treat to see Aman in person.
It is.
Yeah.
Very, very much so.
I'm retired from clinical work. Now I'm just doing my professorship and working at the school. So I don't have to go to the salt mines and come back from that at the end of every day.
Oh, we're happy to see you. And we're always happy to have you, no matter what, and with a picture or without. It's just better with a picture.
Yeah, much better.
Yeah, yes. So go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat if anybody has a takeaway from this particular verse. This is verse 19 in chapter 5. I thought it was pretty interesting, personally. Specifically, where we talked about how it doesn't seem as if Confucius is willing to say that anybody's Ren. It's like he's reserving judgment. And this seems to be a consistent theme throughout, unless he's talking about one of his students every now and then. He does seem to be kind of judgmental. But yeah, there's a couple themes, and I really would like to hear what people have to say about what they thought about loyalty and duty, especially in the first story, that our first example of the. Go ahead and Penny, I guess, right? Unless it's Brian there.
I'm here, but at the moment resting.
Okay.
Well, I had one question first, just about the person who was asking the questions. Mine says Su Chang or something. Was that one of his students? Okay. Because it seemed like the student was really trying to find an example of somebody who was like Ren.
Right.
Like, historically, these are people who really have created an impression on society, that the first person, he took office 3 times and he left 3 times, and he had a lot of equanimity about that, and was helpful at sound, continued to serve even though he had been dismissed. And so he was loyal. And the second one was the person who had left, his country because of the murderous prime minister. And then he found people who he also thought were no better in the next two places he went and left. So seeming to have a very, very high moral standard. But then, the master was like, well, who knows? I mean, can't base anything just on that, but it does seem that I don't know if it's just because he considers Ren so high.
Yeah,
I mean,
That's what-
here it's like perfectly virtuous, and I mean, if you're using the standard of basically you've never made a mistake or you've never done anything wrong, then who could be Ren?
Let me talk about this. It's a very high standard, and probably only Yan Hui, his model student.
that's, yeah, I was about to ask about him.
Yeah, he did that, but remember he died at 40 years old. Okay, very young. So, that's and then one thing I like to correct is Ren is a high standard, but it doesn't mean never make mistake. Okay? Confucius do expect everybody would make mistake, but important thing is you need to correct yourself. So I think that's the key. So.
Well, and he seems, I don't know, unwilling to, kind of judge. He judges someone, but he judges them only harshly. He doesn't praise many people. That's the distinction that I should make. It does seem like throughout the Analects, there's a continuous judgment of who should do what and why and under what circumstances. And even in this particular passage, we see the importance of duty, of fulfilling duty, and he appreciates that. However, nothing necessarily achieves the state of Ren, as he would, as we would say. And I'm not sure as to why that is, and if Mon, maybe you can expand on that.
Well, I wanted to address what you were saying, that he is an incredibly judgmental figure, but it doesn't mean that he's always harshly or judging people inferiorly. In fact, he is very quick to say that the Zhuwen was dutiful, loyal, has these good qualities, but it's when he's pressed to say, do those good qualities raise him to the level of Ren, that he's saying, that's a bridge too far. I can't tell you that that's what it does. And it does seem that he'll compliment qualities, and there's a sort of point in this dialogue that these qualities alone do not therefore equal Ren. They are necessary, but they aren't necessarily sufficient. In order to be considered Ren, I think we're to take away that you need all of these qualities, but you need them wholeheartedly all the time, and just that one ingredient more to make you Ren. And Yinwei had that one ingredient more. He talks about he'd never known a man who could keep his heart set to Ren for I think it was a day or 3 days or something, but Yinwei was capable of doing it for months at a time, which says that this is a volitional action. It's something that's effortful. You actually need to do it, like being dutiful or loyal or honest or trustworthy or brave. You need to act in this way, but it's not just merely sort of the conglomeration of those characteristics together that make one Ren. They need to have those, but then this one other added element, the number 2, and the human orientation towards others as primary.
So it seems like he's also, in a way, what does this say about how he he seems to stop short of judging people's motivations. Is that accurate?
I don't know that that is absolutely accurate because he seems pretty quick to judgment on people who are very venal or where their
Right.
motivation is self-aggrandizement.
Okay, fair.
But
Yeah.
it's when their motives appear altruistic or appear selfless, then he withholds judgment because maybe some degree of it can't really be known what's going on inside that person's heart, and maybe he's been burned one too many times by people who have appeared good for a long time and then discovered that they were self-serving in some other very sort of insidious way. Yeah.
I know, and I think that is it's an interesting example because and I kind of contradicted myself. I said he's not as judgmental in the beginning of this, but he is judgmental toward those who are doing wrong, or what he perceives to be wrong. But he does reserve kind of judgment when it comes to somebody, what they're doing, as far as charity or whatever it may be. And I think that that's kind of something that still holds true today, is that we look at people, often philanthropists, that make huge donations to things. And are they really doing it out of the goodness of their heart? Sometimes they are, maybe. It's hard to say. But sometimes it's done out of very selfish motivations as well. It even can be done because their ego is involved, which would necessarily not be virtuous, according to Confucius. So there's also this other element too. How did you then acquire that wealth? Did you acquire that wealth justly? If you didn't, then the charity is really kind of irrelevant, because an example I always use is that you can't be charitable without being just. I can't, and I've repeated this example at 52 Living Ideas before in the past, but I'll do it again just for this meetup in particular. If I employ Aman and he does work for me and I don't pay him, and I take that money and invest it and become fabulously wealthy, and in that process, Aman were to lose his house and lose everything that he owned, and I then see him on the street, and I said to Aman, "Oh, let me help you out." Is that justice or charity? The reason I can't be charitable is because it's the absence of justice. I can't give Aman money and be charitable because I wasn't just to him in the first place. So if I did, it would be justice, if anything, and it wouldn't even necessarily be the proper amount. My point being is, in this particular case, is that sometimes reserving judgment as to why, people, before we, say they're virtuous, we have to kind of understand everything about them. And that's why maybe Confucius is, kind of cautious about using the term Ren, except with his student that died at 33. So I don't know, or I think around that age. So that's just one example, I think, in this particular instance, as to why maybe Confucius reserves judgment in as far as determining, calling, assigning the title of Ren to someone. So, or saying the person is virtuous. Jason, you had an exclamation point.
Yeah. I don't think, okay, first, I don't think in this chapter we call Confucius judgmental, right? Because he's talking about the people in history, okay? So just like we say, okay, let's talk about Hitler, Ronald Reagan, Churchill, okay? So probably we don't call this one judgmental. But in a way, I agree. Confucius is judgmental. Okay, and I think in Chinese tradition, judgmental may not be bad as long as you judge right. I think the judgmental is Christian value, right? Christian virtue, because Jesus said, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged." Because we have a God. God will judge you. You should not judge. But I think in Chinese tradition, or even in today, probably people don't think judgmental is bad. Okay, as long as you do it correct. Okay. So here, this book, Confucius, is criticizing the historical figure. Okay, and the next book will be more interesting because Confucius is really judge his student. Okay, and sometimes we should not call it too judgmental because a lot of place next book, book 6, he's calling the student based on his capability. He talk about, oh, Amang, you can be a professor, okay, and then Joe, you can be the talk show host, and this kind of thing. But he is not, well, sometimes he's judgmental, that's true, but there's more focus on his capability. Yeah.
It's also very difficult to judge another's motives at the end of the day. I mean, I think it's hard to say. Aman, please.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Jason's right in the sense that there is a cultural value difference on judgment. We have that as a show of being prideful, as something to be avoided, because if you think you are without sin, then you can cast the first stone. Chinese culture doesn't have the same sort of normative value surrounding judgment, and they think of it more like we would have the idea of discernment or discretion. If you're sitting in front of a buffet, what you select to put on your plate, nobody thinks less of you because you dislike the mushu pork more than you wanted, fried rice. It's simply just not a given. But you can have a big conversation about, oh, well, yes, generally I like mushu, but that one, I didn't like the look of it. It didn't look right. It was off. It needed more XYZ. And that's seen more as a characteristic of good taste, good discretion, and good wisdom. I almost said good judgment, but we're talking about judgment.
Right.
Wisdom being the hallmark of being an apt judge of things. And the Analects elevates Confucius to the penultimate judge. He is the wisest figure to speak in all of the Analects. So his decree or his judgment isn't final in the same way that we would say that in a religious tone here in the West, but it is final as far as any of his students are concerned, because they have yet to ever encounter anyone even bordering on the level of wisdom that they found in their master. And so I do think Jason's right. That holds true even today, but also deferring your judgment to the judgment of someone wiser is also a very deeply ingrained Chinese value. And that comes in no small part from the Analects.
So I have to ask this. I know, Kevin, you wanted to speak. Then does that lead it to a natural hierarchical kind of structure?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah. And so we can kind of see some of this and how this fits into present day.
Which is also
structure.
part of why we go all the way back to where we're talking about Shao and the value of honoring your parents or honoring your elders. It was seen as one of the greatest values, because it's almost difficult to imagine how they have double your lifespan without having double your wisdom. Now, it's possible, which is why if you need to remonstrate with them, you need to do it as respectfully as possible, and you better be damn sure of yourself before you speak up to tell somebody who gets the default benefit of the doubt that their wisdom is greater, that they are in fact wrong. But that is kind of the loophole of it not being an absolute hierarchy, but a hierarchy with a reciprocal responsibility working both ways in that hierarchy.
Interesting. Very interesting. Kevin, so they wouldn't have had a 60s generation kind of problem.
Those were the Taoists.
Yeah, okay. That's what I was just thinking. The revolution isn't coming. So sorry about that, Kevin. Go ahead.
No problem, man. That's great. Honestly, I read Analects. For me, it's a learning process too. That's why I didn't, jump right away after you guys talk, serious. This is about two examples. One first, compare to loyalty with Zen, and the second one is Qing, clear or it's Qing is that word. It's got a left side of water. Qing right side is green. Like for example, that example like doesn't if I don't like the government, that's I understand. I can leave. I be myself. I go. Even I leave my boss. I don't serve you. I don't be your citizen. That kind of way. It's from top. That's from first one is from the top. Look at loyalty. To another one is from the ordinary. So my question here is I would make a comment. It's not just do one thing right. It's doing things always right, or try at the intention you do things right. That's here. So that's why I leave question. I don't know. I don't know your future. That's one of culture I want to share. The Chinese hard to see from your confirm for example for your parents, or you do excellent and in Western culture we're going to encourage way doing way. The Asia culture, especially East Asia, they keep silent. They inside are happy for the kids doing, but they don't want to make kid feeling I'm doing great, so I give up. Kind of, that's different. But both way, you kind of learn either way. One of the encourage way, another way. Okay, you need to still learning. Like you can, even you are number one in the class, you still need to compete with yourself. That's that kind of feeling. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason, do you have any comments on that?
No, I think I agree with Kevin. Basics. That's very difficult situation.
So the other thing that's kind of interesting into this is in this section as well is the role of duty ethics. Again, kind of comes up again and again, and you kind of see that throughout the Analects as well, and that's something that still resonates. I see again in today in China, is this idea of your duty as a citizen.
I'd like to ask you, when you talk about duty, you talk about the first example,
The first one, yes, 19.1 in my opinion, or
Yeah.
whatever, 18.1 in mine. But
so that's I see the situation being through the Chinese history being changed. Okay, so this word 忠, okay, I translate. Usually people translate as loyal, right? And
yes,
I think in Analect, okay, means two things. One is loyal to your Lord, and the second thing is loyal, okay, devoted, fully devoted to your job. Okay, that's a two meaning. But over the history, because the meaning has been changed, the first meaning being emphasized. So 忠 typically means loyal to your Lord. Let's undo it for your duty. So I think in because I interpret Confucius at his time, not interpret in through the, because that's 2,500 years history. The meaning has been changed, okay, for 2,500 years, many times. But my observation is this word has been changed to more focus on loyalty to your emperor, because that's important for the government. So
Yes,
people,
yes.
young kids have been teach Confucius focus on Zhong, which means loyal to your lord, your emperor. Then you shall die for your country. Something like this has been twisted to this way. That's my personal opinion.
So help me unpack this a little bit then, this distinction between loyalty and duty. Because I look at, when I define duty, I kind of look at it as that you need to, you're required to act a certain way, the right way, whatever that may be, regardless of the consequences. And I can see that as being defined as duty and that's seen as loyalty. But
I would say that duty probably not 100% correct. I think
okay.
we talk this word zong. I think in Confucius meaning has two things. One is to your lord, but this one probably not that important. I think it's probably more important is fully devoted. Okay, so that means I'm going to do this translation, right? It's hard to say it's my duty, but I want to do this and I fully work on that. Okay, so they will call I zong. Okay, I'm devoted to this job. You can question, is that Jason? Is that your duty? Your duty is clean your house, okay? But you never clean, you keep dirty. So probably duty, probably not the right thing, right? Because I do this thing, I full-hearted to do it. So that's the Confucius, one of the meaning about this word. But I feel this word has been changed, okay, over 2,000 years, and because the government, the dictator or the emperor wants people be loyal to me instead of to his job. So the meaning has been changed, I think.
Okay, thank you for that distinction, Aman. And Jason's place is very clean, by the way.
I envy him. I agree with Jason that this is a case of etymological drift over time. I put Zhong into the chat because I think the elements that make it up are very telling of what this character is meant to confer, which is it's made up of two characters, middle and heart. So this is in the bullseye, the dead center, the middle of your heart. If you are loyal or devoted, then you are acting or doing from what is truly in the center of your heart. And when Jason was talking about the difference between this, excuse me, and duty, it almost reminds me of the difference of a physician who is there because they say they have a calling, and somebody who wound up tumbling in because they were just overwhelmed in student debt, and even though they didn't like what they're doing, they're in it for a penny and for a pound, and they are kept in check by their Hippocratic oath, their duty to do no harm. They're not doing it because it's of their deepest heart's desire and devotion, but because it's compelled upon them, versus someone who we used to jokingly refer to them as patient whisperers, but somebody who has a calling and is there because they believe in what they're doing. As far as the drift goes, though, if you look at these characters, you can almost see how and why that would occur. At Confucius's time, China didn't have one name. All the states of the region we now call China had their own individuals' names: the state of Qi, the state of Wen, the state of Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor, names China Zhongwen, the Middle Kingdom, or Zhonghua, excuse me. And Chinese are 中国人. So that character, middle, is one half of what comes to be described as China, Middle Kingdom. But when you see how that, as a name for a nation, and this character that means devotion or loyalty, how easy it would be to extract, we mean this, and it means you will have that devotion here as well. So it could almost be a case of very intentional selection on the part of naming China, Zhongguo, the Middle Kingdom, because it would evoke this idea of devotion and loyalty. And that is just how it became understood over time within, sort of the Chinese lexicon as devotion, duty, loyalty, all the same thing. Whereas in Confucius's time, it wouldn't have necessarily been to the state unless you had a calling for it. It is first to yourself. And if your state is pure, then you act that calling out through the state for the benefit of all those around you, not because you're trying to get a higher office.
Thank you for that clarification. I think that actually helps out a great deal for me personally. Does anybody else wish to comment on verse 19? I see Kevin, you unmuted.
Yeah. You can hear me, right?
I can.
Yeah.
Can
I
everybody?
appreciate Aman and put the Chinese character over there. That's since 2000 years, and lots of words from word south we kind of learn, from this is up and down. Up is middle, mean, and down is heart. That's about the loyalty. And I would say appreciate also the Jason. I think he thought a lot through it with Aman, right? About loyal, maybe should be bracket. I would say maybe devote, dedication, dutiful, accountability. Describe this kind of for the loyal. Yeah, for the Zhong. Let's say as I say, he said the meaning change. Yeah, that's great. I think got a new meaning for the Zhong. Another one is about the Qing, the water plus the green or blue. It's you think about when you walk to see the bank, right? You see the water is so clean. It's like that. It's also describe that it's clean, and Jason used unmixed. Yeah, it's basically it's sometimes close to loyalty at all, right? Like dedicate, focus what you're doing. Dedication. If I were going to share my personal observation, doesn't matter if I'm in China, is which party or which stage they go. I would say the culture, those still make some drive something. For example, I would say, accountability. If you as officer, if you doing something wrong, you should respond. It's no doubt you're going to rely on yourself, or they're going to kick out. It's not basically your people because vote for you or your leaders delight to you. If you mistake because you go away, and replace somebody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, please go ahead, Aman.
I just wanted to add, since Kevin brought up Qing again, that this is the name, part of the name of the last dynasty of China were the Qing, and they adopted that name in a sort of usurpation of the dynasty that preceded them, which was the Ming, which has elements of fire as part of the makeup of that name. They chose a title with the elements of water as evocative of able to quell the Ming, able to usurp them, replace them, and they were the good and pure, dynasty to be in its place. So these words, although they are ancient and they have layers and layers and layers and layers of meaning, have been used all the way up into the modern era. The Qing dynasty didn't end until the 20th century. So they are very evocative to the Chinese psyche as to what they imply and what they communicate. And a lot of that stems right here from this fountainhead of Confucius Analects, because this was where some of that was first put into motion.
That's, a very interesting point. We talked a couple of weeks ago, actually, as to why we're studying the Analects. But that right there, I feel like captures why it's so important to understand the Analects in a really deep way, because we start to understand how it still is impacting China as we know it today. So this is that's
Yeah,
very-
quick comment, that this, for example, Ming, the last Qing dynasty is called Ming. Like left side is sun, right side is moon, which means the percentage you see is kind of fire. This about 5 element. Joe, I think you heard about that 5 element, right? Fire,
That's right.
water. That's how you see the Qing dynasty overcome the Ming. Like water can overcome the
anything.
fire. You see, that's lots of deep. You talk more deep, very interesting. The lots is under not a basic word, just in a word you cannot describe. You can think through. That's about culture sometimes.
Excellent. Any other comments regarding this specific passage? I've really enjoyed covering this one with you. It's provided me a lot of insight. It is just one verse. So if not, I will humbly ask Penny to read 20, 21, and 22.
Okay. 20. Chiwan thought thrice and then acted. When the master was informed of it, he said, "Twice may do." Chapter. My numbering's different. Whatever.
Yeah, I know it's one off.
The master said, "When good order prevailed in his country, Ningwu acted the part of a wise man. When his country was in disorder, he acted the part of a stupid man. Others may equal his wisdom, but they cannot equal his stupidity." Next chapter. When the master was in Chan, he said, let me return. The little children of my school are ambitious and too hasty. They are accomplished and complete so far, but they do not know how to restrict and shape themselves."
Thank you, Penny. Dave, would you mind reading?
Yeah, I'll be glad to read
verses
this
you,
Watson translation. 20,
Yeah.
Ji Wenzi thought 3 times before he acted. When the master heard of this, he said, "Twice is enough." 21, the master said, in the case of Ning Wu Zi, when the way prevailed in the state, he was wise. When the way did not prevail in the state, he was stupid. His wisdom can be equaled, but not his stupidity. 22, when the master was in Chen, he said, let's go home. The young people of our district are in high spirits, but hasty. The cloth has been handsomely woven, but no one knows how to cut it. And there's a footnote, that is, the people of Lu and Confucius' disciples in particular are ready and eager to be led in the right direction, but they need Confucius to guide them.
Thank you, Dave. That was very different from mine, but I appreciate that. Jason, would you like to go ahead?
Okay. Actually, these three it's talking about three different countries, right? Chapter 20 in the state of Du. Chapter 21 is in the state of Wei, and the chapter 22 is in the state of Chen. Okay, that's in the three different states. Okay. So first, chapter 20, we talking about in the Ji Wenzi. Remember the Ji, okay? Ji Su Meng, okay, that's the three powerful house. And Confucius really have no good words when you see Ji, okay? So that's always, and because the Confucius work for the Meng family. So when they talk about Meng, Meng Wu Bo, Meng Yizi, that's all, well, in general, much better word. And if you talk about Ji, for sure, I'm not sure 100%, but in general, no good word, even have a good deed, okay? So, chapter 20, Ji Wenzi, okay, that's the Ji family, before Confucius. I think a few hundred, probably 1 or 2 generations before Confucius. Must be very famous of a good prime minister or good minister. So people talk about this legend, right? So Ji Wenzi pondered 3 times before acting. So he's a very careful person. Probably is a good word, the commenter. But Confucius said, when the master heard this, he said, pondering once again is enough. So in today's Chinese, say pondering 3 times as a good deed. Let's say you have to be careful. But in Analect, it's based on this tone, sounds like Confucius said, you don't have to ponder it 3 times or so many times. You just pondering 1 more time, it's enough. Okay, so that's chapter 20. 21, okay, Ning Wuzi, okay, Ning Wuzi is the minister of the state of Wei. Okay, that's the first state when Confucius traveling around. So then you will see a lot of people is from the state of Wei. So the master said, as for Ning Wuzi, he was a wise man when his state was well governed. The Confucius words is governed by the Tao. He was a stupid man when his state was ill-governed. So Confucius was not governed by the Tao. So because Ning Wuzi is a minister, he worked for the father who is the Duke Wen of Wei. Okay, he's a good king. Okay, so the government is well in order. Then he died, and his son is Duke Chen of Wei. And Duke Chen is, you know, the young king usually is not there. So the government is not in, is disorder, in turmoil. So Ning Wuzi being a prime minister or some chief minister for both father and the son. That's why Confucius said when the state was well governed, Ning Wuzi was a wise man. And when the state become ill governed, Ning Wuzi become a stupid man. The last comment will be interesting. Okay, he said his wisdom is measurable. Okay, so that means he probably means you can learn his wisdom, but his stupidity is unmeasurable, which you are not be able to learn his stupidity. Okay, so the question is, that's why, you know, Joe said, how come the translation is so different? Because what Confucius means, you cannot match his stupidity, right? So Confucius probably encourage you to be stupid if you, or act stupid when the government is ill-ordered, ill-governed. And this kind of skill probably very difficult to learn, to pretend you are stupid. So that's my interpretation. And then, of course, if you have a different interpretation, then your translation will be different. 22. This one is in the state of Chen. Okay. whenever we read when Confucius in the state of Chen, usually it's not a good time, because when Confucius visit the Chen, and then they have the war between state of Chen and the Cai. If you remember last time we talked about the big turtle, okay, that's from the state of Cai. And Cai and the Chen are two small countries. They fight. So, excuse me. So Confucius visit Chen, and during the time they have a war between these two states. So Confucius got caught up over there, and he probably had like 7 days or 10 days, no food, no water, and depend on Zilu to save Confucius. So Confucius almost died over there during that. So whenever we read Confucius is in Chen, that usually the situation is dangerous. Okay, so here he said when the master was in the state of Chen, he said, "Let's return home. Let's return home." Okay, so right now you know why he said return home, because it's dangerous. Okay, and then he said, "My young disciples are reckless and timid." Okay, so these two words he called 狂简. Okay, and actually in other chapter, I think in book 13, he mentioned more on this one. The proper word could be 狂捐. That's being used as the first word means reckless or means ambitious. Second word, 捐 or 简 means timid or cautious. So here's he talking about his students are either ambitious or cautious, right? You can see if you look at Aristotle's Nicomachean essay, right? There's two vices, and you should find in the golden mean. So you either too ambitious or too cautious. Okay. So, but although they develop well in richness services, so they already show their achievement, they still don't know how to moderate. Okay, so the word 才, he used the metaphor. So he said these students, they are either ambitious or cautious. They already have some achievement. So he used the word 张 that means embroiderment, like making a beautiful clothes. But they don't know how to cut it, how to tailor it. So if you take Aristotelian's term, is they don't know how to find the golden mean. Okay, so they have the skill they already have, they don't find the golden mean. So the big question here is, even in Chinese, it's also difficult to interpret, because does Confucius appreciate what his students' achievement, or Confucius think they are not good enough, right? So that's a big question, right? And personally, I would believe Confucius think their students are doing well, but need some time to learn how to be moderate, stay between two extremes, right? One is over ambitious or over cautious. So that would be my interpretation. But of course, you know, some people may have a different interpretation on this word. Yeah. Thank you.
You're muted, Joe.
Sorry about that. I accidentally hit one of the wrong buttons there. I'll be interested to hear what people have to say specifically about 21 or 20 based on, or 22 based on your numbering. But Aman, would you like to comment first?
Yeah, now I have something to comment on. These three are actually three of my favorites. In the Analects, I think they communicate a really compelling story, but taking them one by one, Ji Wenju pondered 3 times before acting. This was somebody, I could see this as somebody saying, Master, did you know that this man was so wise? He would think over his decisions 3 times before he acted. And Confucius's reaction was, 2's enough. Just totally deflating and dismissing of this sort of what's held, like Jason said, this, ponder 3 times is actually treated as a real virtue. And in this instance, he's saying, no, if you really have wisdom, if you really have, a bead on the goings on of government, of people, of decision making, you shouldn't have to question yourself more than 1 reflection. That should be enough. Otherwise, you're just sort of, flip-flopping back and forth and wasting time. You're buying time. I like that little passage. I think that's just a great vignette. As to Ninglongzi, I think as far as matching his knowledge but not matching his stupidity, this feels to me like a very, if not Taoist influenced passage. Taoism took some cues from this, because this feels very much like something out of the Zhuangzi, where instead of, how do you, in a state that's ran well, be viewed as a pillar of virtue and wisdom, to be gone to seek out your advice. But then when you get some, upstart who couldn't find it with both hands and a map, how do you then just fade off their radar to where they consider you a fool and an idiot and not somebody worth wasting their time on? I think that's what Confucius was getting at here, being able to make that transition and be seen that way because you follow the right path, the right Tao so well, is a virtuosity that not a lot of people have, but should be aspired to, because you should only be sought out for your wisdom when the government is run with virtue by the Tao. If it's not, people should avoid you like the plague. And I think we actually see some contemporary examples of those even in our own lifetime when it comes to choosing who to listen to based on who's making that decision. I won't say much more than that. And 22, the state of Chen and his reckless and trepidatious students. I think there's a little bit, and here I'm going to really go out on a bit of a limb, but I do think there's a bit of a bias to treat every vignette as having sort of the same character structure. The state of Chen was where Confucius was briefly employed. That means it was much earlier than his years and years of wandering with his students. That means he was just cutting his teaching chops and getting better at it briefly. And he found himself in a state not governed by the Tao, not following the way, and was trying to be a wise man and a wise teacher in this state. And what he got were students who could pick up the trappings of learning, but never get to the heart of learning. They were able to perform rituals, but they didn't understand why they were performing them. They were able to do ceremonies, but they never understood why they needed to do it. And it was just a sign to his mind of the depth of corruption that existed in that state. I don't think Confucius had a lot of love for these students that he is speaking about, his young disciples. I don't think these were the ones who followed him around throughout his life. I think this was like an early substitute teaching post where he went, these kids are absolutely terrible. I don't know what's wrong with kids these days, but man, and I think this is included here for 2 reasons. 1, because it kind of shows that, and 2, because he wasn't actually wrong. It was a state that was in a state of decadence. And there was no point trying to be, just like the verse right before it mentions, there's no point trying to be the wise man in a state governed badly. There, you are just setting yourself up for beating your head against the wall. That's kind of why I like the run of these three verses together, because it says, if you take them in reverse order, I went to the state of Chen and I tried to teach. It was a mess. What I learned from it was don't try and be wise in an unwise state. And I should have learned that after one single moment's reflection. I shouldn't have had to ponder over it 3 times to come to that conclusion. So when you read these in that sort of order, they form a really, really nice, pithy little story about Confucius's life.
And I'll tell you what, we very much appreciate you putting that story together for us. That was beautifully done. Beautifully done. Very, very interesting. I'd love to hear if anybody has any comments on this particular. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I think it's 20 was talking about thinking twice or thinking 3 times. Somewhere did it say that 3 really could mean many. And I think our word dithering, that, I'm thinking about it, and not acting. And I think that was the point. Okay, maybe reconsider 1 time, but you have to do it.
Okay, just some comment on this one. The words the Chinese word, they use 3, but that's correct. During that time, 3 means many. So I think many is correct. But your interpretation said thinking too much but not active. But the original word said 季文子 think 3 times and then act. Okay, so 季文子 he really have action. He's not Confucius is not complain. He said no action. He did act, but probably complain. He think too many times.
It is interesting. I find the whole entire these 3 verses actually to be very interesting. I tend to overthink things, so thinking through 3 things 3 times tends to seem to be a little bit too much. I think it kind of, I talk myself sometimes out of a good decision. Although there are times that I wish I had maybe thought 3 times. So that's hard to say, but it surprises me a little bit to think that to be a wise man in a poorly governed state, there's no use to it. There's no utility to that. And I kind of disagree in the sense that if yes, you are banging your head against the wall, but at the same time, at least you're following some philosophy, some kind of logic of your own, that you're not necessarily giving into cultural norms and acting foolishly. I think there's some aspect, some value to that. Aman.
Actually, I was going to let Kevin go first. I'll
Kevin.
follow him.
Go ahead, Kevin, Aman, then Jason.
Thank you, Aman. You kind of come on, correct me if I'm wrong. For the 20, I got 3 sides of point, but currently we actually used one idiom, 三思而后行, basically think 3 times or ponder 3 times, then you're doing. For example, for this one is Ji Wenzi. He is the prime minister of Lu. It's a very high power. For those people, for example, go use another one. For life and death, war or peace, you really need to think about this one. How about you look at our, from you, Americans the last 20 years about the launch war. We really need to think through. You're going to, instant gain or long-term loss. So those, I would say 3 things, no problem. But here, if for tiny thing, yeah, compared to those life death, yeah, why not? Do you think one time? Go ahead. Which restaurant you go it. Which university go? That's maybe a hard, big decision, but it's still manageable. 21 is very interesting. I'm not sure Amanda, Jason can correct me. You guys, I would think about Wu Wei, right? I remember I mentioned this. Wu Wei telling me, do nothing. Sometimes
Are you talking about
Wu Wei,
21 right now?
yeah, 21. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, to connect to about one vice decision, not stupidity, right? So it's like when you meet the vice, or good environment, good management, good company, you want to live with it. You want to join the team. If you live with an ill government, it's a bad shape. Oh yeah, stupid. I stop. I be myself, or you look somewhere else. That's about another interpretation about we doing and non doing or non effort. We or wu wei. That's I would say kind of say connect to there. For verse 22. Yeah, this one is a little bit, I would say, I consider maybe Confucius scholar, because this in the war zone, you consider the peace environment, try, do a speech, talk to nicely. People need food, need living, need avoid war, save life first. It's not an environment for sure for you. We Chinese call it trado, right? It's deliver your wisdom message. It's belly sometimes fully of belly is more important than gaining knowledge sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you. Aman, it's something just really briefly that you said about it previously that had me thinking of a quote. One of my favorite quotes, actually, that Socrates says, "Anyone who holds a true opinion without understanding is like a blind man on the right road." And you made me think of that when you said essentially that the students understand the rituals, they understand what to do, they understand the process, but they don't necessarily understand the why behind it. So that anyway, I thought that was fascinating. That was an interesting, really
I think that's an apt quote for probably at least encapsulating some of Confucius' sentiments in that verse. One thing I wanted to mention is you were talking about not agreeing with it, and I have to agree with you about not agreeing with abandoned ship at the first signs or when things are, or when the chips are down, as it were. But at the same time, it's worth removing ourselves from sort of the present to see this in the context of the time and place he was in. You didn't have a nationalistic sort of, my country right or wrong. He was employed by a different state, the state of Chen, other than his home state of Lu. And I think I've mentioned before at some of these that really this was the only enterprise in existence at that time. Working in government was the job that could be done. And so if you sort of think of it less as in abandoning your civic duty and more as in when a company is having a rough go and you start to see all the talent siphoning off from the top, it's time to start padding your resume, because it's going to be the untalented and the ones who really just willfully ignored the signs who will be there when the ship sinks. to some degree, I think that's a little more of the sentiment that Confucius has going when he says to be a stupid man in a stupid state is much preferable than trying to be the wisest man in a dumb state.
That's very well put. And I appreciate that. That example that you provided of individuals that are incapable of understanding the ship is going down. That yes, you're kind of wasting your breath to a certain degree, and that you need to move on. No, and it's very practical as well. Jason.
Yeah, chapter 20. Okay. Basically, I think Confucius is totally biased, because if we change it to Meng Wenzi, Confucius will say that's great, right? Because it's Ji Wenzi, so Confucius will say twice is enough. So in my opinion, it's a bias. 21. You should be stupid when the state is ill governed. So I think here, if you go back to chapter 2 on this book, Confucius talk about Nanrong, right? And then when the state is well governed, and he can get a job, and then he can survive even the state, he can avoid the execution when the state is ill governed. So he married his brother's daughter to him. So if you put these two together, Confucius is not talk about virtue. He probably talk about survival skill. Okay, during this, because at that time, you are aristocrat. You have to work for the government. Doesn't matter you want or you don't want. You have to work for the government. And if the Lord is a tyrant, you have to protect yourself. So I think here he's talking about the survival kids. Okay, so I think that's 21. 22nd. Seems Among has a different opinion, but I just want to clarify. I do think Confucius is appreciate his student, but sounds like Among think Confucius doesn't think the students doing is good enough. But I think I read as Confucius really appreciate his students for the young kids already so well. I just don't know how to be moderate and imply in the future you guys were doing well. So, but I'm not saying I'm right, but I just want to make clear. Probably I see a lot of Chinese interpretation is talking about Confucius is disappointed what his student did, but I disagree. I think Confucius appreciate what his student already did. So that's probably just a different opinion.
I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, it's hard to tell. One of the, well, actually, I'll let Dave go first. Dave?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I want to comment about the wise man in the poorly run country. It seems to me there's sometimes you don't want to stand out in the crowd. I can see someone telling the stupid ruler, hey, there's a man in that next village over there that thinks he's smarter than you are. And the ruler may say, oh, he does he? And I think that may not be a wise move. Thank you.
No, sometimes go ahead, Aman.
I wanted to actually concede Jason's point and point out that I wasn't necessarily saying this is the way to interpret verse 22. I do think it is a way to interpret verse 22. But I concede absolutely. You can, I think it's intentionally written with an ambiguity so that it could be seen as students may not necessarily be to blame for their own shortcomings, but his devotion to them is absolute. And at the same time, I also think it could be that he's saying, I see the raw material here. I just wish they could, get past these holdups that are keeping them from, being too timid or being too courageous or ambitious. So I do think that vagary is actually intentional. And I think Jason's interpretation of it is as sound an interpretation as any. I just kind of like the reverse read because it tells such a very interesting story and it makes a logical sense as well.
Yeah, interesting. And I agree with the quote in the chat there. But there are two ways to look at this, and I appreciated both the way you and Jason had looked at it. One of it could be the word hasty is actually used in my translation, so that it kind of, you understand that the students are very talented, but maybe they're incapable of disciplining themselves properly, so that you have this, and I think about this all the time. You have this immensely talented individual, but they lack the self-discipline to actually to basically extract all the value of the talent that they actually have. So I find that, and I'm trying to think of an appropriate example of that, but essentially you're just curing sometimes youth of arrogance.
Actually, if I may, I
Please.
see an example of this currently in the newest cohort of student populations that are coming in that have lived through COVID.
Right.
They have had serious damage done to them by that sort of retardation of their socializing. And you see these kids come in who have skills, they have talent, they have ability. What they don't have is sort of the courage. This kind of what this says, they're either too courageous or too timid. There's a lot of timidity that exists in a current population that has been communicating only like this for 2 years and didn't have sort of that social scaffolding in place to withstand that this happened during that process. And it's heartbreaking. It's very frustrating because you just want to grab them by the lapels and say, speak up, just use your voice. It will work. I promise you.
Right.
You're not going to, nobody's going to cancel you or block you. You can't be blocked in a classroom. It's not a real thing. But it is something that structurally in the world is affecting a large number. I won't say every single one, but a large number of students. And yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
It's deeply frustrating, and it makes you question your own abilities. And that's why I do think that there is some value in that reverse read, because I think there is a question in here about Confucius' own ability to become the teacher that he was. He had to go through sort of too much dithering, too many occasions where he held on far too long and he should have let go of, an enterprise, or he failed to capitalize and capture these students' abilities and guide them to something better.
Right. Trying to decide what to do. Jason, what would you suggest that we do? We can keep going with this, I think, and we can work on Dave's comments, or we could try for the next 3. What do you think?
I think we can try for next 3. Right? It's not very long for next 3.
Okay, let's do it. And Amon, if you have to leave, we completely understand.
You need to leave, right? Amon?
Yeah. So
I may. I'm grandparent on call, so if I get the word, I'll wave goodbye, and I will see you all next week.
No, thank you, and it's
And
nice
you'll
to see you.
me.
Oh, it's nice to see. Yeah.
be coming from the salt mines, like I
Also,
said.
you know, Among, I wish when I was young and when the teacher teach Confucius look like you know, there would be more convincing, make sense. Not like old guy murmuring and just ask us to memorize all things.
Well, not to disrupt too far afield, but I think that's because there's the expectation. I'm going to show you guys a photo in my office. There's an expectation that anyone teaching Confucius needs to look like that. Otherwise, they're not worth listening to. And
So now I
honest
know how to
God,
dress for next week.
and honestly, there is a young appetite for some of these ideas, but they have been intentionally made obtuse. They've been intentionally made something that was just for the dusty old scholars for so long. And that's true, in my opinion, of most philosophy, but particularly the ancient classics like Confucius, like Chinese philosophy, the 100 Schools, or ancient Greece. You had to have tweed not just on your elbow patches, but up to your neck and down to your knees to be considered at all worth hearing about or hearing from on the subject. Great part about this new generation is, although they may be reticent in the classroom, they are willing to speak up out into a public forum to speak their minds about what they expect. And they're not shy about saying, you know, can we go back and question this whole, you know, Thomas Locke or whomever? There are no sacred cows for them.
Thank you. And if you do see me trying to dress like that next week, just listen a little bit more closely. But so we'll go on to, I guess it's 23, 24, and 25, but it's really 22. Oh, okay. You're on call. All right. So take care, Armand. So Penny, are you still there? Or if you're not,
I'm here.
you're there? Thank you. Are you still, are you willing to read what would be 22, 23, and 24 for us?
Sure.
If not, I was going to go ahead and.
Well, I can do it. Chapter 23. The master said, Pui and Shuqi did not keep the former wickedness of men in mind, and hence the resentments directed toward them were few. Chapter 24. The master said, who says of Wai Shan Kao that he is upright? One begged some vinegar of him, and he begged it of a neighbor and gave it to the man. Chapter 25. The master said, fine words, an insinuating appearance, and excessive respect. So Chiung Ming was ashamed of them. I also am ashamed of them. To conceal resentment against a person and appear friendly with him, Xiao Chiung Ming was ashamed of such conduct. I also am ashamed of it.
Thank you very much, Penny. Dave, would you?
Yeah, be glad to, Joe. 23, the master said, Bo Yi and Shu Kui did not depend on old wrongs, so they had few feelings of rancor. 24, the master said, who claims that Wai Shengao was honest? When someone came to borrow vinegar from him, he borrowed some from a neighbor and then gave it to the person. 25, the master said, clever words, a pleasing countenance, politeness overdone. Zhou Kui Ming would be ashamed of such, and I would be ashamed too. To hide your distaste for someone and become that person's friend, Zhou Kui Ming would be ashamed of that and I would be ashamed too.
Thank you so much, Dave.
Sure.
Jason.
Okay, 23. There's a name, Bo Yi, Su Qi. Okay, these two names are very famous. All the Confucius, like Confucian mentions. Okay, and anybody like to talk these two persons. They are 500 years before Confucius. Okay, when the Zhou dynasty is founded. So Bo Yi is the eldest son, the crown prince. And his father is the law, I think Guzhu is the state, and which was belong to the previous dynasty. So the prince of Guzhu, instead of give the throne to the first son, Bo Yi, he gave to the second son, Su Qi, okay, or no, third son, Su Qi. So Bo Yi, the old son, the Su Qi refused to take this one because it's not follow the ritual, okay, the ancient law, because you should give the throne to the first son, not the third son. So Su Qi is very pious, okay, xiao, filial pious. So he escaped, okay, and the Bo Yi also escaped because he think his father want to give the throne to his younger brother, and right now his younger brother escaped, so he didn't want to take the throne, so he also escaped. So they went to the mountain and become a hermit over there. And later on, they have the revolution happened because the Zhou dynasty take over the Shang dynasty. So these two brothers decide not to eat because they changed the dynasty. They don't want to betray their old lord. So they decide to not eat it because that's all the food belong to the new dynasty. So they refused to eat, then they die. So being viewed as a highly virtuous brothers in Confucian tradition. So here they are talking about, the master said, Bo Yi and Su Qi never recited the formal wrongdoing from the Yin dynasty, okay? So there were very few complaints about that, okay? So that's Confucius' virtue talking about, because they never recite, they always forget the wrongdoing from your Lord. Okay, so you are forgive because their father, the Yin dynasty is not doing well to them, but they never complain. They always forget. That's why they were very few complaints about them. So that means they are always being viewed as virtuous. So that's the situation. Confucius comment on these two ancient worthy, we should call. 24, that's a little bit interesting. The person Wei Gao Sheng, okay, is an honest, keep his word person. He is, I think he is a Confucius disciple, okay, one of his students. In Zhuangzi, the later account talk about this person, Wei Gao Sheng, he is so honest to his word. So, of course, Zhuangzi's story we don't have to consider as true, okay, but you can see how serious he is about his word, because he has a date with a girl under some riverside or something, but the girl never show up. So he stand there, even the flood come, he never leave. So he drowned and died. Okay, so he's this kind of person. So of course, this story is from Zhuangzi, and there's no reason we believe that's true. But you can see how serious of this person regarding his word. So this chapter said, the master said, who said that 为身高 is straightforward? He used the word 直, okay, honest. Who said 为身高 is straightforward or honest? Someone asked for vinegar from him. He went and get some from his neighbor and give it to him. So it's interesting. Confucius, I think that's a very trivial, small thing, right? So Confucius seems take it seriously. Okay, use this word to comment on his student. 25. The master said, for naked language, pretentious expression, and over courteous behavior, 左丘明 will be ashamed of them, and I am ashamed of them. To hide one's complaints against others and befriend with them, 左丘明 will be ashamed of them, and I am ashamed of them. Okay. I think the teaching is quite obvious, and probably most people have a question is who is 左丘明? And why Confucius compared 左丘明 with him, right? According to the account, 左丘明 is the author of the Spring and Autumn, the Annal of Spring and Autumn. Okay, so probably is Confucius' contemporary, but could be another person with the same name. But the interesting is Confucius say 左丘明 was ashamed of them, and I'm also ashamed of them. I think the reason is this, because both Confucius and 左丘明 has the same given name, the same first name, because the words Confucius used is 左丘明 was ashamed of that, and Chu, okay, that means Confucius himself, that's his name. So I think both of these Confucius and 左丘明 share the same first name. That's why Confucius used him as an example. But we don't know, why Confucius bring him up. But I think one of the reasons could be he and 左丘明 share the same first name, so-called. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Jason. Does anybody have any comments regarding 23, 24, or 25? No comments. So, I'm a little bit, I want to basically go back over, I guess, well, I want to say I guess it would be 25 with the idea of, let me see, it says, fine words are insinuating appearance and excessive respect. Tao's Chu Ming was ashamed of them. I am also ashamed of them. I conceal resentment against a person and appear to be friendly with him. Cao Chu Ming was ashamed of such conduct. I am also ashamed of it. I'm still not clear what they did actually to be ashamed.
You mean why?
They are ashamed.
Oh, okay. Okay. I think he probably my translation is that I also kind of think about this question because the translation problem. Confucius is talking about ashamed of this kind of behavior. Okay, so he's not talking about specific person. He talking about if he's ashamed of doing this kind of behavior, which included the fine language, okay, pretentious expression,
Okay.
over courteous behavior, and hide your complaint and pretend to be friend. Okay, all this kind of behavior, he will not do it. Zhuo Qiuming will not do it. Confucius will not do it. So he's talking about this kind of behavior.
So
He and
pretentious. So being pretentious is a way.
pretension, that means I don't like Joe, and then I could say, hey, you're so smart, but take your hand. I say,
So this
"Okay,
kind of
okay."
gets back to what you were talking about a little bit earlier about having this balance between, this, when we're talking about like this almost a golden mean, like there's an excessive form of respect and overuse of trying to sound more intelligent than you actually are. There's actually a more authentic way of being. Is that the way I'm thinking about it? Kevin,
You
I
are-
think you had
Yeah, I kind of add something, Joe. That's thank you. Pick up the attitude of the middle. Yeah, you mean you think about the middle heart, right? And Qing, a frank. If you Joe, if you want to make friend with somebody, if Kevin, one is Kevin, one is Jason. Jason, keep it flatter, seem good. Yeah, you have so much common. However, if that doesn't mean, that could be a good friend or something, or high virtue, Jason. If another person is Kevin, I keep silent, however, do something bad behind of you. That's also not good. So that's basically from one is from virtue flatter, one person flatter to you, another person is, they had not agree with you, don't say, okay, you are good. Especially this happen in office, I would say. Office politics, you can see this one. Generally, some person is nice talking and it could be happen at the same time, and behind maybe it's complaining you behind. So let's make friend. I would say, nobody, Confucius not like, and I say, Zhuo Qiuming not like. Joe, you don't like either, right? You like frank, straightforward, or at least don't hurt someone. That's about 25. I went backward. 24 is very interested in. Thank you, Jason says share the story about it. I don't know where you get those story. It's nice virtual, right? If somebody beg you ask something, is really need hunger. If you don't have money, you borrow. You see this case, borrow the vinegar, right? Okay, you need something. I can, borrow or ask my neighbor, help somebody else. That's a good virtue. 23. Yeah, this is about, I would say, culture. That day is how you see the people. I'm not sure you guys get it. Those people, they're loyal for the country. If let's say current dynasty is Joe's Bullock, this dynasty. I'm honor for the if you are my king, I'm loyal to you. If somebody, Jason, let's say David, change the dynasty, you know what? No, I'm not server for you. I'm not. That's this case. Even like Jason shared, they both not eat food because it's now they change dynasty from Joe to Dave. So I'm going to hungry until death. That's maybe you think that's crazy, but that's a virtue people valued, they implement. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Does anybody else wish to comment on any of the following verses? I mean, that kind of cleared up a little bit for me, especially the examples that you. Oh, go ahead.
Do you think the three things, okay, the naked language, pretentious expression, and over courteous behavior, do you think that's a bad thing?
I think that it's I don't think it's bad. that's the difference, is that I don't think
Okay,
it's a
so-
vice. I think it's obnoxious. I think it could be seen as, you know, and it can lead to a certain amount of resentment. But I don't necessarily, I don't think that, you know, somebody's trying to impress other people. I think that that's kind of more about them than it is about, you know, yourself, so to speak.
Okay.
That's my personal belief when I think of 23. That's why I was kind of struggling to say, is this something that's really worth correcting?
Yes,
25.
to come very bad. Okay, if you
Yeah,
Yeah.
for me,
Confucius.
I would add about the intention. If you see, you know, just you are awesome, you know, I just share my happiness, you know, even, you know, that's a different. If you intention to for your own gain, either way, yeah, you need to think about it.
That's hard to judge though, with it when it comes to intention. I mean, that's kind of what we, when we went back to 19, that was one of the problems. You know, that you may pass judgment when you shouldn't, but I guess in this
Yeah,
particular
that's good. That's from another side, your own. Whoever receive that kind, you need your own, you know,
Yeah.
kind of judgment and stand still. People say good to you, yeah, absolutely. Nice weather, nice, you look good and look nice. That's good. It's courtesy, but overdone. You know that over courtesy could be we need. Yeah, you kind of feel it. Yeah, even somebody that's a one side. Okay, go ahead, Jason.
I'd like to know how David think about, you know, is this three thing you think is bad? Forget about Confucius. If
Yeah,
somebody
actually, I'd
has-
be interested to know what you think
Okay, how
as
about
well,
other
Dave,
folks? Yes.
or anybody
Any-
else. That is a good,
Yeah, pretentious facial expression, over courteous. Do you think that's a good or bad? Forget about Confucius.
no comments, Dave? You don't think being over courteous?
The 25, I haven't been following
Oh.
all of it closely, but to me, it was somebody that is putting on a show or whatever that's false or whatever. They think they're really something, got a fancy watch, a fancy car, whatever. They're not really a good person, but they're putting on a show. And someone that sidles up to them, oh, I'm your really good buddy. I'm your Robin to your Batman or whatever. I'm ashamed of that, sucking up to somebody who's really nothing. That's the way I took that verse. But
Well, I can see how it can lead to resentment to a certain degree, but at the same time, I think somebody that tries to come off using fine words, and I know quite a few people that do this, that tries too hard. It's, you know, it's not something that you would prefer to see in an individual, but at the same time, I tend to look past it, and I don't necessarily think it's representative of their character. It may represent something else about them, but it's hard to judge. It's hard to really make a judgment about it.
I think that's great because I see that's a big cultural difference. Okay, because in I think it's the Western and the Eastern probably have this kind of difference to look at things, you know. So it's it has a lot of gray area, but look like, you know, in the Western probably more on the. That's just he did nothing, not necessarily bad, but in the Confucian society, probably see it's not good. Talk too much and always use fine word and you know, too much facial expression.
Well, it's interesting for somebody that is so heavily invested in ritual that they would actually say the words are too fine, you know, that somebody's speaking.
That's a good critique, so to Confucius. Yes, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. But
So,
Rachel is follow the ancient sage. Okay, let me try to defend for Confucius. I'm follow the ancient sage, but I'm not follow my own standard. I follow the ancient sage. That's why I can avoid over courteous.
yeah, I mean, and there is something about being overly courteous as well, excessive respect. I think that is a, yeah, I mean, it's in poor taste. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's very difficult to tell. I think sometimes you could be, I could see his point, but anyway, that's just me. Is there anybody else have any comments about numbers 23 or 24 or 25? Kind of lost some steam there for a moment. I was a little tired. Well, if not, then I'm going to go ahead and do upcoming announcements for. Let me just pull up. So tomorrow at 52 Living Ideas, we're going to have Learn and Practice Improv, and that is with Michael Amore. And that is at 9 p.m. It's called Yes And. So that'll be a very interesting, you'll have an opportunity to actually practice improv. Thursday, we'll be covering the Bhagavad Gita with Yogeshwar. We're in chapter 18, the final chapter. It'll take us a little while to get through it, but I encourage everybody to attend if possible, because Yogeshwar it's a treat to listen to. And so that'll be both on Thursday and Friday. On Sunday at 11 a.m., I didn't know about this, there'll be the psychology and cosmology of the Übermensch with Yasuhiko, and that'll be at 11 a.m. And that is it up until Monday. So, and Monday is poetry night if you'd like to join us. So thank you everyone for your time this evening. Thank you, Jason, as always. I thought that this was a very, very interesting section. Next week, we'll be covering the last part of chapter or book or book 5. And then we'll start with book 6. So thank you very, very much, Jason. Jason, actually, do you have an event on Saturday you would like to announce?
Saturday talking about Zen Buddhism.
Oh, okay. Okay, and that's at 7 p.m. And you can find that. I'm sure Shrikant will probably post that either today on the 52 Living Ideas website, as well as the Asian Philosophies website. So I encourage everybody to attend. All right, everyone, have a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we'll see you next week, I hope.
Night all.
Night.